Hi again, everybody. My name is Kevin Pierce. I'm the President and CEO of Caldez Financial, and we are exploring part of a 13-part series in how to navigate the world of alternative finance. As always, I like to begin with a quote to kind of set the spirit of this little episode, and I'll use this one from Billie Jean King. Champions keep playing until they get it right. I like this quote from Billie Jean King because it kind of sets the basis for where we are. You know, the assumption while you're watching this is that, things aren't going according to plan, and you need to find new sources of financing. I'm trying to help you find ways to navigate through this thing, which is what I do in my business every day. But I think an important part of this is, first of all, champions do keep playing until they get it right. Things don't go well all the time, so you have to, find a way to get through the, like I said, the dark passageways. And we also have to be realistic and honest with ourselves and with anybody that we talk to in terms of our need for financing. They are going to cut through all the BS, and they are going to see facts for what they are. There is no way to spin this. Everybody's going to look at facts. So you have to be honest about where you are, and you definitely want to give information that favors the business. But you also have to be, realistic about what your expectations could be when you're in the middle of a turnaround. Okay, so we've been looking at basically the 4 criteria that set different lenders apart and make them either a match or not a match for you. And those 4 criteria that we've been talking about are industry, collateral, and now we're going to talk about performance and size. Okay, so let's talk about financial performance. When we talk about financial performance, we're usually talking about what the P&L looks like. We will talk about balance sheet condition, which is more of a snapshot in time, but let's talk about the P&L for a bit. We're talking about historical profitability, that is long-term history, intermediate history, last year and today. Where are we today? So these are kind of the different elements of historical profitability. We look at things like EBITDA, we look at debt service coverage, and the changes. So what is it better, is it worse? We look at things like gross margin, and we look at the general administrative expense burden, which typically are more fixed than variable when you get down to kind of operating a company within a short period of time, like a year. So in addition to the P&L, like I just alluded to, we're also going to talk about the balance sheet. Balance sheet condition is a snapshot in time. When we look at balance sheet condition, we look at things like balance sheet leverage, we look at equity levels, we look at why equity levels are where they are. Is it distributions? Is the company solvent? Is it solvent currently, or is it solvent long term? So these are different aspects of how you and how lenders would look at the balance sheet. In addition to profitability, we also look at the top line, sales trends. Look at the long-term trends as well as the last 12 months. What are the micro reasons? Why have sales dipped or gone up? And what are the driving motivators for what has happened to your market or in your industry or just your company in terms of its product? Why are sales changing? Most likely in this situation they're going down, but let's focus on why. For instance, sometimes in certain industries there are new technologies that come along, there are new products, there are new competitors. The customer demographic may change. So all these things can be contributing factors as to why you're experiencing a dip in sales. Sometimes you're losing one customer. Sometimes it's just a concentration issue. But the most important thing to know is to be realistic and honest with ourselves about if our sales are trending downward, why are they trending downward? Where's the problem? And when talking about downward trending sales, we may not be talking about just a company issue, we may be talking about a whole industry. I think in a previous episode we used the example of Kodak. Kodak was the number 1 supplier of all camera film in the world, and then when the digital age hit, Kodak became irrelevant. As a result, that was a pretty extreme example of how technology changes and customer demographics can change the viability of a product, but this happens all the time in a technology-driven society like we're in today. All right, let's talk in a little bit more detail about historical profitability, because this is kind of an important subject and all lenders look at it. So when you go to a lender and you're talking about your historical profitability, I think it's important to put it into a very long-term context and go back to the original contributions to your success. Why did the product exist? Why was it in demand? What was the original kind of rationale for running the business, and why did sales go up originally? Why did your growth take hold and put you into the position that you were when you were the best company you were? So in other words, what was the original need for the business, and what consumer or commercial need was being filled? So we're talking about historical profitability, and one of the major measures of profitability that pretty much any lender looks at these days is EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So the difficulty with looking at EBITDA, and some lenders will say things like, your EBITDA went down by 50%, or your EBITDA went down by 80%, or something like that. I think that's a very inaccurate, or actually unfair, way of being critical of a business. And let me illustrate what I'm talking about. The problem with EBITDA is that it's always on the margin, and this is the same thing, same thing is true of, net income and gross margin. But let me illustrate why it's especially difficult with EBITDA because of the way the margins work. So let's say that you've got a company that has 10 million in annual sales in year one, and they are operating with a 20% gross profit margin, and so that makes their gross profit in year one $2 million. Now let's say that they have 1.5 million in G&A expenses, and for the sake of argument, we'll just say that these are all fixed costs. For the sake of illustration, over a long period of time, they're not really fixed. They can be variable, but for this illustration, since we're only talking about 1 year periods, they're relatively fixed. So that means EBITDA in this case is $500,000, 0.5 million. So with $500,000 in EBITDA, that 0.5 divided by 10 equals a 5% EBITDA margin. Now, let's take the same company, and in year two, they only have 8 million in sales. Okay, there's a downward trend in sales, but let's just say that they manage their variable costs well, and so they end up with a gross margin of $1.6 million. Now let's say that they have the same fixed costs because really they didn't see the sales trend coming. This is a common mistake in business, that sometimes for some reason the sales don't materialize like they did the prior year, and they still have 1.5 million in fixed G&A costs, which means now their EBITDA is 0.1 million, which is a 1% EBITDA margin. So you see on the top line, we've had a 20% drop in sales, but we've had an 80% drop in EBITDA. So a lender comes to you and they say, your EBITDA went down by 80%. That sounds pretty bad. But in truth, you've only lost 20% of your sales. The problem is you haven't been able to react quickly enough to take care of these fixed costs so that your coverage or your margins stay relatively the same. That's called operating leverage. And operating leverage is good when sales are trending up because the same thing works in reverse, but it's bad when they're trending down. This fixed cost, to the extent that they're still fixed, sorry, this should be $1.5 million. To the extent that they're still fixed, they get in your way when there's a downward trend. So, and typically companies can't change these expenses quickly enough because they tend to be infrastructure related or related to just the general operation of the business. So unfortunately, your sales can go down or up by 20% with a very minimal impact to this line. But what it does is it explains why a banker says your EBITDA went down 80%. It sounds horrible, but in fact, it's just all due to a 20% drop in sales. So when talking about historical profitability, it's important to keep it into a context. This 20% drop in sales translates to an 80% drop in EBITDA, which, a banker could look at and, kind of unfairly say, look at you guys are withering away to nothing. You got an 80% drop in EBITDA, but in fact, you have two things going on. You may have a volume variance, that is supply and demand affecting sales, and then you may have other rate variances built into this. But for the sake of argument, I'm showing you why it's difficult to explain significant drops in EBITDA unless you're looking at the overall picture and breaking it down into the loss of revenue and maybe potential gains in terms of margin or drop in fixed expenses. So again, thank you for watching. I appreciate you being here for this episode on navigating the world of alternative finance. My name is Kevin Pierce. I'm the president and CEO of Caldez Financial. Please join me on the web at www.caldezfinancial.com or shoot me an email with any feedback that you've got to kevin.pierce@caldezfinancial.com. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next week.